Peace be upon you all, and welcome to this new episode of Seeing God in Biology with Dr. Fuz Rana. And today, with an exciting topic, biochemical finite state machines. So, yeah, Fuz, how are you doing today?
Ahmed, I'm doing really well, and as always, it's a lot of fun to spend time with you. I consider us kindred spirits, and so and I can't think of a better person to have a conversation with about finite state machines in biochemical systems than you. So
Wow.
hopefully, our complementary expertise will kind of flesh out some really remarkable aspects about biochemistry that point to the creator's fingerprints.
Wow, for sure, I second that. So I'm really interested to listen what you have to tell us today, and it seems quite like a contrast. Biochemical from one side, when it's biochemistry, we think of biology, we think of organs, we think of fluffy or gooey things, and machines from the other side, squares and lines and things that are rigid. And state machines is this piece of modeling where things have very definite states. Doesn't look like from the surface, doesn't lend itself to biochemistry and biology. So quite interested to hear what we have coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe the first place to begin is to talk a little bit about what is a finite state machine. And this is something that I've only really recently learned about within the
Hmm.
last few months. And so, I would ask your audience to bear with me as a biochemist who's just learned about finite state machines, attempting to kind of explain what they are. So, by the way, please, Ahmed, feel free to jump in and rescue me when it looks like I need rescuing. So,
I don't
uh,
think you'll need rescue, but there is a fun thing about, the kindred spirits thing. So while coming, I had a long drive and I was thinking, what can be a good example of a finite state machine? I was thinking, yeah, a door, it can be open or closed and there can be a lock. So it can be closed and locked and there can be a key. So I'm thinking, and the first thing you're showing me now on the slide is an open door and a closed door. So this this just came quite as a surprise to me. You just
yeah,
use this example, so it's
yeah,
unbelievable.
and what I thought we could do as a way to introduce people in your audience who aren't familiar with finite state machines is to just step through a few common examples
Mm,
of finite state machines that almost everybody is familiar with, because these are machines that are all around us, and they are in effect machines that can exist in several different discrete states where inputs into the system will cause the machine to transition from one state to the other, with the hope that when it transitions from one state to the other, some kind of task is accomplished. And so, as you mentioned, this is a diagram that an engineer or a computer scientist would produce, describing a door as a finite state machine. And a door can exist in two states, right? Open or
mm,
closed.
yeah.
In the simplest configuration, where if you pull on the door, that if it's closed, it will open. So pulling on the door is an input, and if the door is open and you push on it, it'll close the door. And so pushing and pulling are the inputs, and the states of that finite machine would be either the door is open or it's closed. Now, if the door is closed and you push on it, that input is not going to affect the transition. Or if it's open and you pull on it, that input won't affect the transition. So the input can affect a transition depending upon the state that the finite state machine is in. But in effect, this is what a finite state machine is that, again, in this case, the machine exists in two states. There's two inputs that can either open or close the door, and in doing so accomplish a task in both cases.
Mm, yeah.
Right. So another example of a finite state machine that people are probably familiar with would be a turnstile. So let's see if I can, here we go. And so here again is the turnstile, and this is the diagram that demonstrates the inputs that cause the turnstile to change from one state to the other. It can either be locked or unlocked. And so if you put a coin in and it's the coin of the right type, a token, if it's the right token, the turnstile will unlock and allow you to pass through. And then if it's not the right token, of course, the turnstile will remain locked. But as soon as the turnstile turns, it returns back to the original state. So this is a variation of a finite state machine where there's two states, but one state is essentially a transient state that will, as soon as, again, that the person walks through the turnstile, it goes back to the original state. So again, fairly simple machines, finite state machines. Now here's one that's a little bit more interesting, and this illustrates an important point about finite state machines, is that many times it's not just a single input that's important, but multiple inputs, and those inputs have to be in the right sequence in order to affect a change in state. And so, with a combination lock, it can be either locked, which is one state, or unlocked, which is the other state. But to go from the locked state to the unlocked state, you have to put in the right combination. And so you have to have a sequence of the right numbers in order to unlock the combination lock, where there are 10 possible inputs, but only one of them will work at each stage of that sequence, where the other 9 inputs are going to produce no results. Yeah. So again, another example of a finite state machine. Now this is one that gets a little bit more complicated, and this is, of course, a vending machine, right? Where you have all kinds of snack items in the machine, and the items cost different amounts. So you have to put in the right amount of money, and then you have to push the right entry to get the snack that you desire. And of course, if the rack is completely empty, even if you put the right amount in or you put in the right sequence, you're not going to get that snack. And so even if you have the right input and the right sequence of inputs, if the machine is in a particular state, it still may not be able to undergo a transition. So the state of the machine can also be important in terms of whether it will transition from one state to the other, and again, accomplishing a task. And this is a fairly sophisticated, sequence of events where you have different ways you can put in, let's say, a dollar worth of coins, where it can be 4 quarters, 10 dimes, and all kinds of possible permutations. And so depending upon the coin that's put in, the machine will go to a particular state, waiting for the next input that will then take it to a number of other alternate states, each which again are waiting for specific inputs before you produce the right amount of coins in order to make that selection viable. So in other words, finite state machines can be very sophisticated machines that can handle quite a significant number of inputs and quite a significant number of input sequences as it transitions from one state to the other.
Yeah.
So these are
one nice analogy that I heard from a computer scientist was that a finite state machine will determine whether the grammar or sequence of a sentence makes it valid or not. So it is like a language validator. So you would tell it, for example, the lock is like, it's like a magical spell, for example. So the lock can unlock if you put 1, 3, and 5. So 1, 3, and 5 is the valid sentence that the lock can accept. You will get the gum if you put any combination of legal coins that add up to $1, for example. So the finite state machine is this combination of existing states and future states where the target state will only unlock if you go through a legal or a regular or an acceptable grammar to unlock the goal.
Yeah, that's a really helpful analogy uh, that just very nicely encapsulates what I'm struggling to communicate.
Yeah, and I think it will also tie in quite well with the with some of the things that we talked about, that those biochemical magical things, they always wait for the right thing, and then magic happens. So it's really amazing. Yeah.
Yes. Well, here's another a finite state machine that many of us are familiar with, and of course, this is an ATM, and we don't
Mm.
need to belabor the point here, other than again, what I'm trying to communicate is just how pervasive finite state machines are in our common day experience, and again, how sophisticated these machines actually are, uh, and uh, and how elaborate the programming can be with respect to finite state machines. And this is just again a diagram of some type of undefined finite state machine, just giving again people a sense of how complicated the machine can be. This particular machine, I think, has maybe 19 or 20 states and
Mm.
a whole array of inputs that will take the machine from one state to the other, depending on its initial state and the nature of the input. Now, this is also something that I think is very interesting, and that is when you're developing a computer program, in effect, you are working with finite state machines where maybe you would see different subroutines as being discrete states in the computer program where particular inputs will produce certain outputs in that subroutine, but some inputs, if they are maybe if then inputs, will actually trigger a transition from one subroutine to another. So
Yeah.
it's not just simply mechanical machines that are, designed to take inputs and transition from one state to the other, producing function. It also happens in computer programming as well.
Yeah. Especially when the problem is sophisticated, maybe chopping it down over a state diagram can make it easier to pin down what are the possible inputs, what is the kind of processing that will take, what are the rules actually. The trick
Right.
here is what are the rules, and then how you can go from point A to point Z, and you have all the possibilities covered, and all the faults or abnormal conditions also covered.
Well, and so the point I think would be that finite state machines are, on one hand, kind of abstract machines that an engineer or a mathematician might work with to help to uh, maybe model very complex phenomena that they're trying to understand or to exploit for technology purposes. They can be mechanical machines, or they can be a combination of mechanical machines that are taking electronic input that's controlling the mechanical hardware, or they can be, in effect, computer programs. And so,
Yeah.
finite state machines are highly versatile. It's a highly versatile concept that is all around us, whether we realize it or not. Uh, and
Yeah.
and of course, if you're dealing with finite state machines, this is reflecting a very sophisticated type of machinery that has been, you know, conceived of and then designed uh, and then built to accomplish a particular task. And so when we see finite state machines, even the simplest machines display a level of ingenuity and insight that suggests that they are the work of a mind, that they are the product of a designer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so then the question is, are finite state machines found in biochemistry? And
Mm.
uh, what introduced me to this idea of a finite state machine to begin with, and then the fact that it could actually exist in biochemical systems, was a paper published uh, fairly recently studying this single-celled eukaryotic organism known as, I think it's euploides, is the way you pronounce the organism's name. It's called a ciliate, and it's an organism that is a flattened ovoid where it has a top and a bottom, a dorsal and a ventral side. And on the ventral side are these little cirri. They're like feet-like structures that allow this single-celled organism to walk along irregular surfaces. So the organism can swim. If it encounters a surface, it can use these feet-like structure, these ciria, to essentially walk along the surface. And people who have studied this organism have marveled at the fact that it seems as if it is functioning like a complex multicellular organism, taking input from the environment and then responding to that input in a fairly sophisticated way. And there have even been people who have speculated maybe there's some kind of rudimentary nervous system in this single-celled organism that seems to be able to control its behavior in light of the environmental conditions that it finds itself in. And here is a diagram I found online, produced by a biologist in 1838, kind of showing euploides from the top, from the dorsal side, and then a side view showing the little tiny cirri that are used like feet or legs for the organism to walk around.
It's as if it's like an insect, not just a unicellular organism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And here's again here's a microscopic image of this organism, again, walking along a surface. And so you can see on the ventral side these little cirri that are extending downward. And so as it turns out, the scientists who were studying this organism speculated that maybe what's going on here is that this organism is actually operating with using, in terms of its gait, in terms of its ability to walk around, it's operating as if it was a finite state machine, where they noted that the cirri are connected to a microtubule network. And perhaps it was a change in states, conformational changes that allowed that microtubule network to exist in multiple states that actually controlled the gating activity of this particular organism. And microtubules are these hollow filaments that are found inside cells that are formed from a protein called tubulin that consists of two subunits, alpha and beta. And these subunits are organized into what are called protofilaments, where 13 protofilaments form the entire tubule. So this is a diagram of a microtubule, and microtubules tend to exist in networks within the cell. So these are part of the cytoskeleton, along with actin, for example, and other intermediate filaments. Microtubules form part of the cytoskeleton, which give cells structural integrity. They play a role in cell transport. So, for example, I think one of your favorite molecular motors, kinesin, will move along.
Absolutely.
Right. We'll move along these microtubule networks along with another protein called dynein, moving cellular cargo. These form part of the apparatus that separates chromosomes during cell division, and also play a role in motility. And so the thought is here again that there is this microtubule network to which the cirri are attached, and depending upon environmental cues that the organism is picking up, somehow that signaling is impacting the conformational structure of the microtubule network, allowing the organism to transition from discrete states to discrete states, creating this gating action, allowing it to move along surfaces. And so this is what the researchers write. Let's see here. I'm going to have to, I think, unfortunately, put on my glasses to read
Hmm.
this. But it says, we found that cellular walking entails highly regulated transitions between a discrete set of gate states. The set of observed transitions decomposes into a small group of high probability, temporarily irreversible transitions, forming a cycle, and a large group of low probability, time symmetric transitions, thus revealing stereotypical insequential patterns of state transitions. Taken together, these findings implicate a finite state machine like process. Siri are connected by microtubule bundles, and we found that the dynamics of Siri involved in different state transitions are associated with the structure of the microtubule bundle system. Perturbative experiments revealed that the fibers mediate gate coordination, suggesting a mechanical basis of gate control. And so that's, uh, highly technical language that essentially is a summary of what we've just have been discussing. But I think again, what's interesting here is that these researchers took these videos and analyzed the videos frame by frame by frame, looking at the gating activity and noting again through that process these discrete states that seem to again indicate that it was functioning like a finite state machine. And so this, to my knowledge, is the first example of a finite state machine in a biochemical system. Now,
Wow.
after reading this paper, I
The,
spent a
the
little bit of
word
time.
the
Go
word
ahead. Go
gate
ahead.
means the word gate means the way of walking, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
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 And so, this was again my first introduction really to finite state machines, and my first introduction to the possibility of biochemical finite state machines. And so I became curious as to whether or not finite state machines exist in other biochemical systems. And so, as I did a literature search, I could find really very little, if anything, uh, other than this paper describing, again, a biochemical finite state machine. But what these researchers point out is that this actually may be the opening up the possibility that looking at biochemical systems as finite state machines may be an incredibly productive way of understanding the structure and the operation of biochemical systems. And
Hmm.
so the only examples I found, which were maybe a handful of papers published where people were talking about finite state machines in light of biochemistry, uh, had to do with work in synthetic biology, where people are trying to design, gene networks and things like that to cause organisms to behave in non-natural ways. But having seen those handful of papers, I'm going to skip ahead a few slides here, and then we can come back to these. Uh,
Hmm.
I began to think about, is it possible that finite state machines may be pervasive in biochemistry? In fact, this might be a very productive way of actually thinking about biochemical systems as really finite state machines. And so um, this is a diagram showing uh, uh, the network of chemical reactions that take place inside a typical cell. These are the reactions that form what are known as intermediary metabolism, where you have these small molecules that are converted in a stepwise manner into other molecules, where each reaction step is mediated by an enzyme, and you have an input and an output in these metabolic pathways, where the output might be um, the end product of breaking down organic material to extract energy for the cell to use. These are also the pathways that produce the building block materials for cells that will process cellular waste for secretion into the environment. But when you think about intermediary metabolism, it's essentially these linear or these branched pathways. So here's an example of glycolysis, which is a linear pathway. And this is an example of the Krebs cycle, which is a circular pathway. And these pathways will interact with each other to form kind of this reticulated network of chemical interactions. And that there are key steps in these pathways where you have enzymes that are functioning as regulatory enzymes that will either cause the reaction to progress in a forward manner or shut down the reaction. So they're kind of like these on-off switches in these pathways. So, for example, you can have feed forward and feed back mechanisms. Like the feed forward mechanism may be that if you're trying to produce a large amount of a particular compound, that metabolic pathway will be designed in such a way that the end product of that pathway will actually activate an enzyme at the very beginning of the pathway, accelerating the movement of material through the pathway. Feedback would be that the end product might interact with an enzyme at the very beginning of the pathway, shutting it down if you no longer need that particular endpoint. And so there's a variety of regulatory mechanisms where there are these inputs and outputs that are turning on and turning off these metabolic pathways as needed. And so when you think about the metabolic pathways, you can think about an individual metabolic pathway that has a particular reaction sequence it's trying to accomplish. But many times these pathways are working collaboratively. And so you can think of those metabolic pathways as being, in a sense, states, right? Where there's input and output, where the input and the output would be metabolites. There would be additional inputs that reflect the energy status of the cell or other things like that that may be cues for either turning on or turning off the metabolic pathway. But if you think about each metabolic pathway as kind of a state in the cell, where you have, again, a variety of inputs and outputs, where you can begin to think about the overall collection of intermediary metabolic processes as being, in a sense, a biochemical finite state machine, where the totality of intermediary metabolism is essentially, again, representing transitions from one state to another. And so when you lay out this metabolic pathway, or the collection of metabolic pathways kind of in a meta, from a meta perspective, topologically it looks very similar to a finite state machine diagram, right?
Absolutely.
That's really the point that I'm trying to get across. And then, of course, the same thing would be true when it comes to gene regulation. So, for example, we talked in a previous episode about gene regulation, where you have the gene proper, which is the coding sequence, and then there is a promoter sequence and an operator sequence. And if you have like a transcription activator that binds to the operator, it makes it easier for the RNA polymerase to bind and the gene to be transcribed. If that activator debinds, then the binding is not as, the affinity of the binding is reduced, and so the transcription level drops off. Or if you have a repressor, if the repressor binds, it shuts down transcription. If it debinds, it activates transcription. So again, you can think of the transcription factors as being inputs that are turning on and turning off genes, where the genes can transition from either a state of being transcribed to a state of not being transcribed. And so you can begin to think of them as finite state machines. And of course, we talked about in bacteria the lac operon, where if lactose is present in the environment, lactose will bind to a repressor that will then debind from the operator, the operator, allowing, again, the RNA polymerase to bind and to read and transcribe the genes that code for proteins that are involved in lactose metabolism. When lactose is not present, the repressor bind, uh, shutting down the transcription. Uh, and so, in a sense, when you start thinking about gene regulation, you can think of this again as being like a finite state machine. And in fact, people that are working in synthetic biology think about gene regulation in those terms as they're trying to design these novel genetic circuits. But again, when you look at topologically, the gene regulatory networks that you see in cells, and again, a finite state machine, what you end up seeing are these highly similar types of diagrams, topologically speaking, which suggests that you could begin to view gene regulation as a finite state machine. And so I think this idea that finite state machines are pervasive in biochemistry is a reasonable idea, and it very well may open up a new way of thinking about biochemistry that I think up to this point people have really not thought about biochemistry whatsoever, or thought about biochemistry in these terms whatsoever. And so so often I hear skeptics say, if you embrace intelligent design or creationism and you say God did it, it just shuts down scientific inquiry. Well, here's an example of viewing biology from a design perspective or a creation model perspective, where it actually may potentially open up a brand new area of scientific investigation, a brand new way of really thinking about a biochemistry that may be incredibly productive, not only in terms of understanding biochemistry, but in terms of translating that understanding into new technologies in areas like synthetic biology and what have you.
Yeah.
Now, one other point, and then we'll kind of start unpacking some of the theological ideas here. I remember, gosh, it's been a number of years ago, maybe almost 10 years ago, there was a paper published by Paul Davies and Sarah Walker about the origin of life problem. And what Paul Davies was pointing out is that we're never going to understand the origin of life given the current approach that origin of life researchers are taking, because they tend to neglect the informational aspects of biochemical systems, that they are chemical systems, but they're also information systems, and that the tendency in prebiotic chemistry is to view biochemical systems as chemical systems, neglecting their informational content. But he argues that what is really unique about biochemical information, that is what we need to pay attention to, isn't the information that's found in DNA, RNA, and proteins, and the sequences of nucleotides or amino acids, but it rather is the fact that instantiated within biochemical in the biomolecules are these set of instructions that are telling the biomolecules how to behave collaboratively. And so he argues that the way to think about this information is as algorithmic information, not Shannon information. And his argument is that we have no understanding as to how algorithmic information could emerge. How is it possible for a collaboration of biomolecules to develop instructional information that dictates how these systems behave with respect to particular inputs and outputs that then overall work collaboratively to support life processes? And what he did in this paper is argued that von Neumann, with his idea of a universal constructor, was basically was on the right track in terms of how to think about biochemical systems, where again, it's essentially this machine that can build other machines, including itself, right? But it's a machine where, again, the information is instantiated within the molecules itself. Now, I didn't appreciate at the time, and I'm not sure if Paul Davies and Sarah Walker appreciated this either, but what they are describing is essentially finite state machines. In other words, what they're saying is that the origin of life is essentially the problem of how do you explain the emergence of biochemical finite state machines. And so, in other words, what's exciting to me is I'm suddenly seeing, you know,
Hmm.
in the last week or so, this convergence and this giant aha, where
Yeah.
I think what you're looking at in biochemistry is this collaboration of finite state machines that are producing this very complex machinery in and of itself that is functioning like a life form, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyway, uh, it's fascinating to think about what this actually means for biochemistry. But to me, what I really want us to chat about is this idea that keeps coming up over and over and over again as
Hmm.
we're recording these episodes. And that's this, is that there seems to be this provocative interplay between biochemical systems and human technologies,
Yeah.
where when we understand a human technology, it gives us insight into the structure and function of biochemical systems. And as we, uh, as we understand biochemical systems, it gives us inspiration that leads to new technologies, right? And so there's this interplay between the technologies that we build and the fact that they seem to have representatives, inside the cell that are far superior to anything that we build. And that, again, as we study biochemical systems, it gives us this insight that allows us, again, to develop technologies that we probably wouldn't even have conceived of if it wasn't for studying biochemical systems. And to me, this is profoundly philosophical and theological
Yeah.
in nature, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Actually, what you have just gone through is the whole topic of the state machines is so fascinating, and I am so excited that you have mentioned the kinesin and the microtubules thing, because I those things are shocking. There will be and there have been some videos playing during this demonstration, but just look at how a microtubule would respond when a kinesin comes, or a dynein, and the fact that they would just have like a bridge on demand or a road on demand thing, and the great, when I'm now thinking of it again in light of what you've been saying, that I have read this paper where the question of how does the microtubule in the first place takes how does the microtubule in the first place take shape or take form, and that the state of the microtubule gets changed when it locks, when the feet or the head of the kinesin locks to it, and this creates a sequence of reactions that causes the microtubule to extend and invite more of its tubulin to go, and that this goes to a certain direction, and the more the kinesin moves on it, the more that this moves the microtubule to different states. And when when the cargo arrives, maybe that would be a success state that would then unwind the microtubule or make it form in a different direction where another piece of cargo wants to go. And the interesting thing about that, the one interesting, insightful thing about state machines is that they don't have memory. This is if you just think of it, how a system can exhibit very sophisticated behavior, but the data and the logic of the system can be just reduced into what state the system is in now and what are the inputs. And this will continue taking the system into one state after another state after another state, to the extent that it executes a very sophisticated problem solution. And this has two layers, actually. The first layer is the modeling of the state machine, where it needs somebody who's really very a thoughtful person to reduce a system from its physical nature or electronic computer program nature into those states. So it takes, if the system is quite sophisticated, then it takes quite a lot of ingenuity. But then also the implementation of the system that will really make it be able to execute such a state machine logic. And if you look at the old times state machines, like, you know, the parking lot machine that would take coins even before computers, okay, and it will give you the ticket, or the vending machines before the time of the computers, or those monster, you know, machines that had gears and they can, you know, behave like calculators, or those, you know, little music boxes where you will have little toys that are dancing together and making all the moves and, you know, moving around with the music being produced, etc. And those things, the whole logic and the data are all encoded into those sequence of states where the mechanical machine will eventually give you this little ballerina or this little thing, as if it's, you know, doing the piano or making a dance, just like this little bacterium or a unicellular organism that walks. And how much appreciation would we as humans give to somebody who has created this moving mechanical marvel that looks like somebody writing a letter or somebody playing the piano or a ballerina dancing in a music box? How much appreciation would we give to that? Now, how much even more appreciation if that ballerina can actually get out of the box and interact with the room and find a place where it will dance and then finish the dance and go back into the box and sleep. And if you call on it, it will get out again and do another dance. I think we will be shocked.
Right.
And nobody will think that this ballerina can emerge as a matter of coincidence. It will be completely absurd. But when we see this little unicellular organism, or the huge pathway of metabolism, or kinesins and dyneins, not only walking on microtubules, but making this completely mind-blowing sequence of events that causes eventually chromatin to split and cell division, etc. I think your insight that maybe this whole big machine, which is a living cell, is this hyper complex state machine that is tying it all together. But then if this is the case, then we have two major questions. The first question, who is the genius who has written this huge state diagram? And then who is the genius that has found the implementation using biochemistry so that the execution of the state diagram is even possible, embedding both logic and data? So the algorithmic side that Paul Davies was talking about, and the data side, which is what is the combination that is going to unlock whatever the combination lock or the vending machine or the ATM or whatever, putting them together in an implementation using biochemistry to the extent that logic is sitting somewhere and data is sitting somewhere. But really, maybe this is the reason that we cannot really properly explain DNA. Is it a program or is it data, or is it actually both? It is actually data and a program put together in one thing, so that the combination lock at the end of the day is mechanical parts that actually know what is the data that will unlock it, all in one thing. So it's really, even for people who don't know computer science or biochemistry, the whole idea that there is a huge system that would respond to its environment in this ingenious way whether it's very small, like a unicellular organism, or even smaller, like a kinesin walking inside, or a dynein walking inside a cell, a human cell or an animal cell, is totally unconceivable to be anything but the work of a magnificent mind. And then one thing that I need to add on top is that no matter how ingenious a state machine that we create, it remains not self-aware. And then it will give us the third question. Those biochemical systems are self-aware, because we know we are self-aware, and animals look to be self-aware, and insects look to be self-aware. Not sure about plants, but animal life at least is obviously self-aware. And then it means there is something else apart from the data and the logic that causes life to strive for life, not just to move around and find food, but causes life to fight to remain living.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an unmistakable fingerprint that whoever has created this is living.
Mm.
You know, God in my religion and in your religion, in the Abrahamic religions, is living. God is the living. He is the living. All right. I'm not sure if in Hebrew I can find a term that conveys that. But even some people have an interpretation of the tetragram Yahweh as the one who is living.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when Moses asked the burning bush, when the burning bush was burning, who is this that who are you, right? Who is this that's sending me to Pharaoh? And the answer was, I am, right? And so that's that idea. I'm the ultimate being, right?
The being, yeah.
Yes. And so I'm ever presently existing, right? And so that's, I think, would be analogous to say that I'm the living, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think this matter of, and then that humans, when they want to model sophisticated systems that will be autonomous, they use finite state machines. And you know, those finite state machines that are memoryless, that continue acting, they're called automata. One of them is automaton. And you mentioned von Neumann because he was so he was so fond of automata, and his universal constructor is actually an abstract huge automata, I would guess. But I think the missing part there is that to have this universal constructor must be self-aware. So it cannot be just a machine.
Yeah.
I think the missing piece when we're talking about machines is that they're machines. They're not, a machine is like almost by definition not self-aware. It is like mechanical kind of thing. And then the question would be, if we can reduce life to a hugely complicated set of biochemical state machines, would that even represent life? Because there will be still the element of consciousness, of self-awareness,
right,
that needs to fit in the formula in two places. Number one, that the universal constructor has to be self-aware. And number two, where is the self-awareness in animal life coming from?
Yeah.
And it can only come from the universal creator who is self-aware. So because you mentioned theological implications, so I just put it all together. Hope it wasn't so long.
Yeah. Well, but and maybe this is the point you're making, and I hope this is the point you're making, and I'm not, misunderstanding. But to me, the analogy would be an ATM machine where somebody has, again, modeled and designed and built this machine to take input. So if I give it the right code and I give it the right input, I can get money out of the ATM machine from my account. And and so the machine was designed and built to respond to my needs, but ultimately I am still outside of the machine, giving the desired input to affect the action of the machine. And so I think you could think about living systems as being, again, finite state machines that are incredibly sophisticated, you know, automata, but then there still has to be something outside that automata that is giving it the desired input to produce the result. So,
Absolutely.
you could think of the immaterial aspect of our nature as regulating or providing the input into the audit, into the finite state machines that make up, let's say, the human body, as
Absolutely.
being that input that is really directing the activity of those finite state machines. Is that where you're
Yeah. So
getting at, or I
it's it's
misunderstanding?
it's it's really amazing. Actually, it's a great crystallization of that. So let's say that the ATM machine itself is a reflection of part of the soul of the engineer who built it. So I have an idea that I need a machine where you will push a button and money will come out of the wall. And this manifests in an ATM machine. And the analogy there will be, actually, I don't know why, but I thought of that as a virus. Okay. So a virus looks like a machine. I don't think that many biochemists or biologists would consider that a virus is really living or self-aware. It looks like a fundamental machine. It is a manifestation to a will in the creator to have this creature that does very specific things, to do corrections, to do injections of pieces of code somewhere, sometime, under certain conditions, to just be interested, to remain there, to do something that we do not understand. So you have this level of a machine, like the combination lock, or like the ATM machine, or like the vending machine, the virus. It says that there is a mind that has programmed it, regardless that the ATM machine does not know that it's an ATM machine. It just keeps happening to be there. And then you have the other machine, which is like the mouse or the cat, or even this small unicellular organism. There is a machine, but it also knows that it is an ATM machine, and it wants to continue being there and living and enjoying life and striving for life, and fighting for life. So and then this ultimate machine, which is the human being, is not only a machine, but it also has its own will and its own ingenuity to build other machines. So like in the image of God kind of analogy, that God constructs things, creates things, and we construct and create things. And uh, maybe He has taught us to do these things this way, to find Him, to have a route back to find Him. And I think this is what you mean here by um, comparing biochemical systems to human technology. Um, I think it also helps us to see that the third element that we have, which is the soul, which is the non-machine part, is what actually drives us to create other machines that are not self-aware. And because we cannot give them part of our soul, they will never be self-aware. But God can give us a soul,
Mm,
so we are self-aware.
yeah.
And there's these two aspects of it. You have to have a machine that can accommodate a soul, but you also must have a soul. So
Yeah.
this is, yeah. Does that make any sense?
It does. It makes a lot to me. It makes a lot of sense.
I hope to others it does too. So yeah, are we there with the presentation, Fuzz,
Yes, yes, I
or
think
yeah?
so. I think so. I think we've made the points that I would have wanted to make. But yeah, this is going to be one of those things that I think is going to keep me up at night as I start thinking about this more and more. That and I think it's remarkable that as we develop technologies or become aware of technologies, in my case, you know, uh, it suddenly gives us a whole new way of thinking about living systems that's incredibly productive, and that to me is remarkably provocative. And and again, I think it suggests that there's some kind of deep relationship that we have as human beings with the one who made the world around us, that we can learn about through scientific investigation, and then can use that insight to build technology. It's remarkable that the technology we conceive of is, again, eerie in its similarity to the technology that exists within living systems. And it suggests to me that there's some kind of deep connection we have with the Creator, uh, who made us and made the world that we live in.
Absolutely. And even when we think of space exploration, we think of making those bots that would self-replicate and would do those tasks. When they arrive to a place, they start trying to terraform it according to the state. They start replicating, finding materials, building some more of their own, and then changing the environment step by step. Obviously, we are not there yet, but it seems that if there is any hope for terraforming another planet at all, then thinking in terms of automata and self-replicating machines, and machines that change their behavior according to their state and the inputs in the environment, etc. And we are thinking of that because we are intelligent, and this is eventually what intelligence is going to take us at, building those huge state machines. And if you are so powerful and so infinitely smart, and you can manipulate things at the molecular level, uh, this is the level where God is creating. We create at a higher macro level, and we're trying to do it with synthetic biochemistry, I guess, to go deeper and smaller. But again, obviously, the similarity between the more we learn, the more human technology learns from biochemical systems, and we start understanding that this can only be there as the work of a great mind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
if unguided, undirected evolutionary processes ultimately produced biochemical systems and living systems in a broad context, why on earth would you, as an engineer, ever want to turn to those designs that are just cobbled together for inspiration? That seems like a, a fast track to failure, if indeed
absolutely.
evolution is the mechanism by which life is created. But if it's the work of the supreme intelligence, right, the creator of all things, then of course you would want to study and mimic those designs that we see in biology. There's not a better source of inspiration than biology and biochemistry, if it's indeed the work of a creator.
Absolutely. I think this episode was so enlightening. I think I will read, when I read more papers in biology and biochemistry and things about evolution, this matter of finite state machines will pop into my mind totally to the front part of the picture. So thank you for that, Fuzz. And I'm confident that everybody who's watching this is fascinated by those ideas, and it's gonna really shed plenty of light on understanding. And I hope many biochemists and many biologists would pick the idea and start maybe getting over their prejudice and looking into the design element and the algorithmic element and the informational element of life. And if you're investigating an alien piece of computer, it wouldn't hurt you to study its technology, to acknowledge that other intelligent life has created it, right? Actually, it will
Yes.
help you. Otherwise, if you look at it like a well-formed rock, I don't think it will take you anywhere. So, yeah, so I hope some people will come to their rationale, and it will definitely help humanity and help science and help faith. and help people find themselves, I guess. Because if somebody doesn't find God, he doesn't find himself, I guess.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, amen to that. So thanks a lot, Faz. That was plenty of fun. And next time we'll talk about maybe another finite state machine, an amazing one, maybe pseudogenes, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe it will take us to talk about viruses and other ERV interesting stuff. Maybe, who knows? Yeah. So until we meet again next time, and thank you for this great presentation and great episode. And for everybody who has watched this, please put your questions or comments in the comment section. Share this to the end of the world, and join us again next week for another episode of Seeing God in Biology with Dr. Fuz Rana. Thank you, and peace be upon you all.